Hey, I'm Arlo Parks, and this is the LSQ podcast. I just remember being fascinated by language. Like, it felt like this treasure that I was discovering, and I had this weird affinity with, I remember being obsessed with like the word pebble and the sense of like different shapes. Like, I don't really understand fully what it was. Maybe it's because I learnt French before English. So my approach to the English language was quite kind of like seeking and grasping and like understanding as I went along. But the dictionary was like, yeah, I remember being obsessed with it.
What's up? It's Jenny Elliskew. If you've been a fan of Arlo Parks' music over the course of her 3 beautiful albums, I'm sure it comes as no surprise to learn that the young UK singer-songwriter has been obsessed with words since childhood, as you heard her remarking just then on her habit of reading the dictionary as a kid. In episode 137, Arlo shares more about her early life explorations of poetry and songcraft, memories of hearing Otis Redding from the backseat of her dad's car, discovering Miles Davis and Prince in her uncle's vinyl collection, downloading Arctic Monkeys and Kaiser Chiefs onto her iPod, trying to learn to play all of Elliott Smith's Either Or on guitar, and eventually beginning to make her own music near the end of high school. We also discuss Arlo's approach to her wonderful new album Ambiguous Desire, and how going out to dance clubs and DJ nights brought new inspiration. And I especially love that Arlo came over to my house to do this interview in person. All right, let's get into it.
All right, great.
Cool. Yeah, I feel like almost everything I do nowadays is on Zoom, and I'd so much prefer to just like be face to face with somebody and like have a conversation.
Yeah.
Especially because always like spotty Wi-Fi, and then like someone's got their camera off and something's lagging and whatever, and I'm like, let's just be real again.
Yeah.
I remember the days.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I was refreshing my memory about the timing of all your stuff career-wise, and like remembering that your first album, Collapsed in Sunbeams, got really tangled up in COVID.
Yeah, I mean, I was making it in 2020. Like, as the lockdown began, I remember I had like booked out this Airbnb with the producer I was working with at the time. And we were kind of in this little bubble already making the record. And then when things shifted, I was like even more immersed in that, because it felt like everyone was kind of severed from the world in their little kind of silos. So I did that, and then touring coincided with like the lockdowns being lifted, and I had never really toured properly before. And was so used to, as we all were, being like insular and in your space, and then to be perceived on that mega level was like a lot, for sure.
Yeah. Well, so we're going to talk about the new album, Ambiguous Desire, a bit, but mostly what I do for this series is like go way back to your earlier life experiences with your creativity and with making music, and kind of the steps that all led up to, you know, the more familiar era of things. Also that. Because, you know, I do stuff for Sirius XMU, and so this way I get to do 2 different kinds of interviews or whatever. Tell me what you remember of like the earliest moments of feeling like a creative person.
That's a good question. I feel like my earliest sense of being connected to music was being in the car with my dad and hearing Sitting on the Dock of the Bay by Otis Redding, and being mesmerized by the way that I was kind of being moved by like the cadence of his voice. And I started writing when I was super young. Like, writing was always, I think, my creative anchor, and it probably still is. So I think it was honestly just like being a kid and making up stories and being kind of lost in my own world and reading the dictionary and just being fascinated by language. So that is like the music connection, and then the creative person, I think, was like actually generating these worlds. And like, yeah, that was, I still do that though, I guess. So it's still part of me.
So I want to go back to reading the dictionary though. So tell me more of what you remember of how that started and what that was. What do you think that was about?
It was honestly this like, I've thought about it quite often, like what drew me to that, because my parents were big readers and were interested in literature, but like no one really wrote. And I just remember being fascinated by language. Like, it felt like this treasure that I was discovering, and I had this weird affinity with, I remember being obsessed with like the word pebble and the sense of like different shapes. Like I don't really understand fully what it was. Maybe it's because I learnt French before English. So my approach to the English language was quite kind of like seeking and grasping and like understanding as I went along. But the dictionary was like, yeah, I remember being obsessed with it.
Pebble. So the word pebble, something about that.
Yeah.
I mean, I wonder, again, obviously, because yes, French was your first language, and I wonder if phonetically it was so different to the phonetics of something in French that it just felt like, what are those sounds?
Yeah.
How old were you at that point?
I think I was like probably like 4 or 5.
Wow,
Yeah,
super young.
Because my parents would always tell me that I was obsessed with like reading the dictionary and like listening to audiobooks. Like my dad would put on audiobooks that I guess he wanted to listen to. You know, it would be like Hemingway and like a bunch of different stories, and the classics though. Like it was very classic literature, like Herman Hesse and like Dickens and stuff. So I remember it feeling so opaque, but I was interested in like the shapes and the way that things would look written down, and I just had a fascination with like words themselves.
Was there overlap already at the beginning when you're hearing Sitting on the Dock of the Bay and stuff like that with the words and the phonetic stuff? Like, do you think that the music that you were hearing that stuck with you from what your parents were playing, like, was about the words too, or were they on separate tracks kind of initially?
I think they were on separate tracks initially. Like, I think the writing felt like one avenue, and then specifically with that Otis Redding song, I remember just like noticing that they have those sounds of like the sea and the wind like underlaid like throughout the whole song. And so it was about like texture and instruments. I think that's what I always gravitated to in music. And then, you know, when I was a little bit older and had an understanding of like poetry and stories and how it all worked together, like the language became really important, but they felt quite separate at the beginning actually.
And then when did you start to have like your own music that you were into that wasn't just like what your parents were playing? What kind of shit was that? Because you're born in the year 2000, right?
Yeah.
So I'm guessing, you know, when like you're 10, you're 11, when you start to
Well, yeah, I was like 10 or so. I feel like I actually, like my 11th birthday present was, or maybe 10th birthday, was to go. Like my uncle had this massive record collection in his basement. He lives like in the outskirts of Paris. And my present was just to be able to go down there and just like get as many records as I could fit in like the trunk of my parents' car and like drive it back to London and just like discover all these records.
Like vinyl records?
Yeah, vinyl. Yeah. So that was like my first encounters with that. He had like Prince records, Sade records, LL Cool J, like Bitches Brew, Charles Mingus, like just a really diverse, eclectic mix of like mainly Black artists. So on that side, there was that. And then just like downloading on my iPod, I loved like the Arctic Monkeys and Nirvana and the Kaiser Chiefs and Deftones and like guitar music, I think felt like my rebellion in a way. Like I think I was quite an angsty kid in that way.
Do you have any sense of when you were going through the stuff in your uncle's basement, like how you chose, what was it, like album covers?
So it was covers, definitely. Yeah. Either it was things that maybe I'd heard like someone's older sibling mentioning as cool, like, but it was mainly just the covers and the visuals that really attracted to me. You know, some of like those Miles Davis album covers, or even the Prince stuff with his like androgyny and like the shininess and the purple and the color and the drama. Like I was drawn to that for sure.
You mentioned Arctic Monkeys. I mean, it must have been interesting being in the UK, and, you know, obviously they exploded a few years earlier than what you're talking about.
Yeah.
They were already, you know, 2006 is when they had their, you know, like record-setting debut where it like sold as much as the Beatles. Like no debut album had sold that fast since the Beatles in the UK when that, whatever people say.
Well, because that was the album that I downloaded on my iPod. I was like a bit late to the game, but like
Well, you were a child.
Yeah, I was a child, yes. I guess I was 6 years old. But
Come on, man. It's 2006, Arlo. Whatever.
You're like, I'm 10.
I'm 10. No, but like, I bet You Look Good on the Dance Floor and Mardi Bum and like all those songs have such, I feel like there's that line where it's like, you've got the face on, and like my mom will still say that, like when I'm sulking. It's like, it was so ingrained in like, I think my parents also didn't really understand how I would arrive there. My mom listened to like Whitney Houston, my dad, just jazz. And I was there like kind of singing all these like rowdy guitar songs, and I think they found it quite like comical. They were like, where did this come from?
But it must have just been hugely popular at school and stuff at that
school,
time.
Yeah. At school it was.
And by 2010, because actually Humbug is one of my favorite Arctic Monkeys albums, which came out in 2009, and that's the one that has Cornerstone on it. I feel like Cornerstone like is sort of a little more like leaning into the kind of songs that you write. Like, I don't know if that's a Arctic Monkeys tune that you've spent much time with.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I haven't spent
I
as
smelt
much
your
time
scent
with
on the
that one.
seatbelt.
Yeah.
Right? You know that one?
Yeah. But it's so true. And I feel like that's what I loved about their first record too, where it was like, it felt like you were like on a night out with them, like being on the bus, being outside the club, like the colors and the women walking down the street. And like, there was something so alive about it that I remember being like, oh, like songs are stories.
Did you, once you got a little bit older, did you start going out to gigs and stuff?
Honestly, it's like, I'm asked this all the time, and like, I didn't really go to that many shows when I was growing up. I think I probably just spent most of my spare time just like in my room making songs, and like kind of kept to myself in that way. And then almost transitioned into like playing shows myself and getting into that world. So I actually didn't see that many shows when I was a kid.
And when did writing songs start to happen? How old was...
Maybe when I was like 13 or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
And were you writing prose or poetry or other sort of creative writing before that?
Yeah, before that I was always writing poetry and short stories. I was more interested in like it's the language thing, where I gravitated to poetry because I wasn't that interested in like plots and developing stories. I just wanted to like use pretty words and put them together like a little puzzle. So I was doing that a lot, and then kind of transferred into like playing guitar a bit more and like getting GarageBand on my computer and starting to make beats, and that's how the song started flowing.
And were you like nerding out on poetry in terms of like reading masters and
yeah. Definitely.
Who were some of the I'm not well versed in poetry, so I can't pretend to be like, oh yes, Keats.
Yes, I was literally
Keats
gonna say Keats. That's so funny. Yeah, it was. Well, I feel like some of it was what I was learning at school, but I feel like I loved like the beats in New York. Like I loved Patti Smith and like reading like William Burroughs and Allen Ginsberg, and like that kind of slightly rowdier, like less structured poetry was what intrigued me the most. But then I was reading the Keats and like the Wordsworth of it all, but I think I was mostly attracted to poetry that felt like it fell out of the shape that I was being taught that poetry had to sit in. Like the rhyme schemes and the stanzas and stuff, like I didn't really connect to any of that. So I liked the poems that felt almost like in this weird, like genre-less middle ground.
Can you think of like a favorite poem from that era of your life, or what, sort of what you might have been most trying to emulate yourself at that age?
That's interesting. Maybe something like, I was reading a lot of like T.S. Eliot, maybe like The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, because it's like this weird kind of like rambling essay, like kind of opus. And I loved to read, and I still do this, to read poems and again, just find the little, like almost like clipping out little bits of newspaper, like the little words and phrases and like the way that words were being used. And I would kind of like steal that from my favorite poems and like try and figure out how it worked.
What was sort of what kind of topics did you gravitate toward whether for your poems at that age or when you started to write songs?
Oh, just love and heartbreak and just like being gay. Like, it was all about the yearning and the desire in that way. Also, I think just generally like kind of being introspective and like slightly existential, and being that age of like trying to figure out who I was in the world and connecting to like anything in that general sphere, in other people's poetry. And then just I was always really inspired by poems that were just about like people and relationships. And I think that's still what I explore in my music. But whether that's like family dynamics or lovers or parents, you know, whatever it might be, it was always about people. There was always something hyper specific about. It wasn't like love as like a massive context. It was like this moment on the bench with this person. How did that feel? So it was always quite micro in that way.
How did you get better? I mean, were there...
Just doing it every day, yeah, which is still how I do it. Like, I think it is this muscle. And even if I don't write for a few weeks, I come back to it and I don't feel quite as sharp. So I was literally just writing every day, just like by myself. Like, that became my refuge and like a rhythm that I found really comforting, for sure.
When do you think you started to have kind of like your own style, or the sort of the style that you can still see in the work that you do now, or your, you know, your voice?
Yeah, that's interesting. I honestly think around that like 13, 14 time when I started making songs, because I think that is when I first started translating like the poetry into like a musical framework. And I still remember, not specifically, but some of the songs that I was writing where I was mentioning like the colors and the names of people and the books that I was reading, because I was lifting the lyrics kind of directly from my journals. So I could identify that there was a style there that I hope has improved since I was that age, but that has like the little markers of an Arlo Parks like song or taste.
And then what about like playing guitar or piano or learning to play? How did that kind of develop?
Yeah, so I started playing piano when I was young, when I was like 6 or 7, I think. It was quite like classical piano. And then when I was like 11, 12-ish is when I started playing guitar. And that was mainly me just kind of trying to figure out other people's songs and then understanding like basic chords and kind of being able to like, I basically copied other people's songs until I could like make my own shapes and figure out how to make my own songs. But that was also something that I liked. I think I've got quite like a studious mind, so I loved sitting there in front of the tabs and just like getting it perfect. Like,
what were the songs you were teaching yourself? What artists were you mimicking?
What was I teaching myself?
Was it folk music or?
Well, it was, yeah. I was like trying my best. Like I don't think I quite realized how hard Elliott Smith songs were to play. But I was trying to like learn either or, top to bottom, learn some like Joni Mitchell songs and some like, it was mainly folk songs, but then like Little Wing by Jimi Hendrix was something I loved playing. Anything that was kind of in that realm. But the folk music and like singer-songwriter songs were the ones that like I gravitated to the most. And Sufjan Stevens and stuff also.
By the time you were recording and releasing music in like 2017 or whatever, so you're 17 at that point, so still quite young.
Yeah.
And were you finished with school or?
No, not yet. I was still going to school at the same time for those first 2 years of like me making music.
Did you have any sense at that point that the music you were making was something to pursue in the way that you've ended up pursuing it? Like, or was it purely just as an outlet? And were you thinking that you were going to go into some line of work after school?
No, I thought I really wanted to be a journalist, actually.
Okay.
Like I wanted to do something that involved writing, and I had a place at a university in the UK, and I kind of said to my parents, like, instead of taking a gap year or whatever, I was like, gonna give myself a year to like try and make music work, and then if it doesn't work, then I'll go to school and do English literature, and if it does, then I'll do music. And it did work. So it almost felt like this experiment. Like it didn't feel like something I was certain on or set on. Like I was sure that I would make music for the rest of my life, but it felt like such a like abstract, far away goal because no one in my family does anything creative, that it was more this kind of wishful thinking until it solidified into something real.
And how did your parents feel about the plan?
Yeah, they felt good about the plan. I think they knew that I was the kind of kid who like, I'm quite like careful with my risks, and they knew that like even if it didn't work out, I would get some kind of like learning from it, I guess. And as things started happening and like I got signed and like I met my manager and people started like coming to my shows and connecting to what I was making, I think they could tell that I was like building something. So yeah.
I want to go back a little because I also meant to ask with singing as well, because we've talked about playing guitar and writing songs and writing words. But with singing, when did that, was it sort of always something that felt satisfying to you and that you liked to do? Or was it more a vehicle for your songs?
I always, and my relationship to it now is different, but like when I was younger, I was always singing. And I was like singing in choirs and stuff at school, but it was almost constant. Like I think I drove everyone around me crazy because I would just always have songs stuck in my head and little melodies kind of popping out. And it was something that felt so natural to me, almost like speaking, that I would do it quite constantly. And it was not in a way where I wanted to do anything like crazy and technical. It was more just like this really natural way to just express and like something I did almost absentmindedly, I think, like 99% of the time.
So what was it that kind of caught on that made it so that somebody wanted to be your manager? And so what got you, what were the things that kind of broke through to make momentum start to happen?
Yeah, so I was making songs at home, like just on my computer. And in the UK, like BBC Introducing has this, I guess, uploader where anyone can upload songs and like some DJs or maybe their assistants or whatever will like go through all this music and pass through, and like if there is a song that they think is like worthy of being played on the air, then they'll play it. And I uploaded a few tracks to that, and then maybe a year later a couple of them got played on like this guy called Phil Taggart's show on Radio 1 and a couple other things. And one of the women who was working there at the time, called Jess Izzat, was asked by my now manager, like, oh, is there anyone like young and up and coming that you're excited by? And she said me. And so he reached out to me, and then like the rest is history. But it was through the radio, which is cool.
So then suddenly it was sort of like went from being like, I've got plan A and plan B and my parents are on board for if this gap year, if this doesn't, and then suddenly you've got a manager and you were played on BBC One.
Yeah.
The one. The big one.
The big one, yeah. Yeah, I think it was like, yeah, in a way though, they had seen that like since I was a kid, like that's all I wanted to do was write and make things.
Right, but your mind must have been blown. Your own mind must have been blown that you uploaded these songs and now it was all really happening.
It was such a, yeah. I remember that time like so vividly. There are so many little markers that I remember. Like I remember getting 100 plays on SoundCloud and I was so happy. Like these milestones that I think it's important to remember those as well. Like as things kind of grow and change, like those things I was so excited about and that felt like my world was changing.
When did you start collaborating with other artists and songwriters and stuff like that? When did collaboration become something that you were exploring?
Well, to be honest, maybe when I was like 15 or 16, which was mainly honestly just like friends that I had like through SoundCloud who like made beats or instrumentals that, we would share back and forth. And then I had a few friends from school, like my friend Alice who played bass, my friend Matthew who played guitar, and then my friend Alex who was on drums. And so we made our own little mini band where I would like have these sets where we would do maybe like 4 or 5 songs together. And then I would just like bring my little laptop that kept crashing like and just put it on the thing and just like play my instrumentals and sing. So performance had a bit of collaboration, and then like musically I was trying to, because I knew that I had limitations. Like I enjoy production, but it's not like my heart and soul. It's more just, a method to like get my ideas down. So I did enjoy being challenged by like other people's chords and tastes and stuff.
Do you find that that there's something different that happens with what comes out of you when there's another person in the room while you're making it, as opposed to when you're just like by yourself completely?
I guess it depends who it is. Like, I think with Bad, like my main collaborator nowadays, like there is a level of comfort that feels like I am just by myself. I feel weirdly, like when I'm in a room and I'm bouncing off somebody else, from like a writing, like the lyric side of things, I like to do that alone. But if I'm building a song, I find it more exciting to have somebody who's like responding to ideas and challenging me and like generating new things, because I do feel like I reach for similar chords or like make similar choices when I'm alone. And when there is somebody there who's also excited and who you trust, it feels a bit more exciting and like dynamic sometimes.
I know you and Baird collaborated on stuff for My Soft Machine. That was the first time that you guys had worked together, right?
We worked together on the last record on Devotion and then Pegasus with Phoebe.
Okay, right. And then he was your main collaborator, though, for Ambiguous Desire, right?
Yeah.
It was sort of just the two of you.
Yeah, so he and I worked on everything. There are a couple songs that I started with Paul Epworth and one that I did with Andrew Sarlo and my friend Brad Oberhofer. And there are a few other like instrumentalists who are contributing, and Rob Bizel worked on Two-Sided. But in general, it was me and Baird sitting there and like either writing the songs or like pulling the songs into the world production-wise.
And what do you think it is about collaborating with him that works so well for you, or at least at this sort of era?
I think he just is so excited about music. Like he just truly loves music and like has such an adventurous spirit when it comes to music, and like also has such a lack of ego that like we both just want the song to be good and he wants my vision to come to life. And there is this kind of beautiful like positive energy and humility and just like, and he's also just really good. He's just really fucking good at what he does. And it's almost like falling in love, you know? Like there is this chemistry and this understanding that you share that's like hard to put into words, that like when it works, it just works.
Going into making this new album, did you have any specific ideas in mind, like ahead of writing anything, of just sort of like next time / this time I want to try this that I haven't tried before?
I think my main thing was like, I just want to focus on doing only this. Like I don't want to be doing a book thing on the side and traveling a bunch and being so in motion. I want to see what it's like if I just make a record for these next 2 years. And that was something I'd not really attempted. I mean, Collapse in Sunbeams, I guess, was that because of the pandemic. But that was also a process of like only a few months, super condensed. I had never made a record before. But I was like, with the knowledge that I have now, what does it look like to just commit to doing this every day until it's done?
And so what was different about that? Like, in what ways did that feel different? Or what was it better?
It felt so different. It felt amazing, really. You kind of create this like little bubble, this like beautifully kind of insular thing that weirdly reminded me of when I was a teenager, when I was like making music in my little attic bedroom, because you almost remove any sense that there's like anyone outside of just you two making this thing that you both really care about, but that feels only really important in that room. So I think spending those years like really shedding the layers of the fact that like anyone was listening and anyone outside of us was caring was actually really helpful. And I think made me create in a way that was really unself-conscious in a different way, maybe.
I know also some of what you've said around the album is that you were going out, there was, sort of experiencing nightlife, being out around people as something that was part of the inspiration. So during the day or whatever, at certain times, you're working, and then were you on a fact-finding, sort of doing that kind of like social activity and social activity? She's like, I live in a cave and I go do social activity. But, were you sort of like, let me explore a certain kind of social experience because I know that will be inspiring? Or were you just because you were... Maybe later down the line,
yeah. I think at the beginning I was just kind of like, that was maybe also something I did differently, where I was like, I just want to like live and throw myself into like, what is it like to be spontaneous? Like, what do I want to do today? Because I think my whole adult life was kind of put into these little slices where I was on the road and I, sound checks here and this is here and I'm in this country. Like, I kind of wanted to see what it was like to give myself a bit more space. And so I was going out a lot more, being inspired by those sounds, bringing those sounds back to the studio. And then, when I did have a sense of like oh, that like Despacito thing that Soulwax and James Murphy have is coming into town. Like, I'm gonna go, or like a Jamie XX show, whatever it might be. Or some of my favorite DJs were playing. It was still because I loved it, but there was a little part of me that was like, oh, okay, that snare and that choice and that space. Like, I was collecting.
Right. And so this was in New York mostly, yeah?
Yeah, between New York and here.
Right.
But I feel like New York is the home of that. Nothing could compare.
And can you remember a particular sort of night out that was just sort of like for you legendary that just
Yeah. I think like it was Fortet's night that he throws under the K Bridge with a bunch of collaborators, like everyone from so obviously Fortet was playing, Joy Orbison was playing, a couple other folks from London as well. But there was something about like the brutalist kind of industrial architecture of the bridge and the pink and blue lights and just like this kind of murky like space, because I was beside the stage and you can just see the crowd is like this like writhing like alive mass of bodies, and that was so inspiring to me. Felt like it kind of combined all the elements of like these quite muscular sounds, the light, the cement and the metal and people all together. And that just felt like the alchemy where I was like, this is what I want the album to feel like.
And so then to translate that to there are obviously multiple tracks on Ambiguous Desire that have some of that feel to them. Mm-hmm. How did you know when it's just you and Baird back in the studio and you're making it? Was there something you would do to kind of test if it was, if it was taking you there? Like I feel like a song like maybe Jetta or something like that.
Oh yeah, we would just go down like to where my car was parked in the basement and just play it so loud. And we would have our little 15-minute break. We'd go down and listen. And then we would go upstairs and blast like our favorite. We would blast like 2 Months Off by Underworld so loud. And then we would like put our bounce on and be like, okay, does it feel like it lives anywhere in the same world? Like, if it was a DJ set, would that work? Like, to put it in the context of these songs we admired. So that was like our little ritual, for sure.
And how did you know when it was done?
I just felt it. I just knew.
Yeah.
Like, every song on the record, when I made it, I knew that it was going to be on the album. Everything else kind of didn't feel quite right. And I mean, in a way, it is like art is kind of never finished, like only abandoned. Like it was kind of that thing where I had that time to kind of chip away for so long, and there were these micro choices that I kept going back and forth on. But when it felt good, I felt happy just like putting it to the side and thinking about what I was going to make next, to be honest.
Okay, and that's interesting.
Yeah.
Before I ask about that, though, is there anything different you're going to do with the shows for this album, given that different texture to it?
Definitely. I mean, we put on these sonic exploration shows like at the tail end of last year, which was kind of bringing the studio setup to the stage and like having it in the round, having like the tape machines and the granular synths and the drum machines and, being able to dub the drums like a DJ set and do crazy delay throws on my voice and like kind of bring the actual equipment into the live setup, which before has been more kind of like indie band, like drums, bass, guitar, pretty down the middle. And I want to bring that to like the headline stuff that I'll do. It's going to be still my same band that I've been playing with for like 7-8 years, but I want what's on stage and what people see to be reflective of like what we use to make it, because I think that feels more true to the sound this time.
And so then when working in some of the older songs to the set, any plans to kind of turn some of the more, as you say, kind of straight down the middle older songs into more of a dance vibe? Like, will there be any reinterpretations of? Yeah,
maybe. I feel like I want to still maintain like the spirit of some of those older songs, because I think it also makes for like a more dynamic show if there are ebbs and flows. What really pulled it into the world was the fact that a lot of those songs were rooted in these breaks, because I had this love of like Portishead and trip hop and like those kind of drums became the backbone of that music too. So when I chopped up those breaks and was able to manipulate them like I was manipulating the drums from this record, it did create this like tie that was quite cool. Yeah.
Are you a fan of Porches?
Yes, I am actually. Yeah. I love Porches.
I love
He's
the way
great.
he goes back and forth between more dance beat-driven stuff and the rock stuff, and I feel like it.
He navigates that so well.
Yeah.
So well. I love Porches.
So when you say you already were starting to think about what's next, what's next? You know, and I will say I don't want to be that bitch who's just like, your album's not even out yet. What's next? Meh. But you mentioned.
Just I'm just like onto like, I'm like looking forward.
Right.
Like I don't know what it's gonna sound like, but I do feel like I almost have to close a chapter in order to even start dreaming outside of, you know, what I'm doing. But no solid plans.
Right.
Writing has begun for something.
Wow, very exciting. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, I think that's a good place for us to end.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having
Awesome.
me.
Thanks so much.
It's been so nice.
Thanks again to Arlo for that wonderful conversation and for coming over to do it in person. Arlo is going to be out on the road on her Desire tour in North America starting at the end of August. You can get tickets and additional info at arloparksofficial.com. And thank you for listening to the LSQ podcast. Other episodes are available at jennylsq.com and on podcast platforms. You can reach me with questions or feedback via email at lsqpod@gmail.com and on socials including Instagram and Blue Sky and TikTok at JennyLSQ.